And welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. And then maybe that's the question we could open up for the phone lines. I am suggesting in my column today, rightlyconcerned.com, that evangelicals have actually very little to fear from a Mormon presidency. I mean, not that it should be of no concern to us. I'm not saying that at all. I think all of us would have a preference to have an Orthodox Christian running for that office. The reality is there were any number of Orthodox Christians that did run for the Republican nomination, and they didn't get it. So Governor Romney is the one that Republican voters chose. He's the one that's riding the horse. Either he or Barack Obama is going to be our next president. And you look at this hand-wringing on the left. I mean, they are practically got to put them on a suicide watch. They are so depressed over what Obama has done to his own campaign. And so naturally, I think you got to ask the question, okay, what are the implications of a Mormon president for evangelicals? And I'm suggesting that I think the consequences are actually not going to be that severe. I'd like to know if you're as sanguine about this as I am, or maybe if you're more concerned than I happen to be. And as I suggested in the last segment, I think, number one, Governor Romney's Mormonism is going to be contained. You know, he didn't proselytize for the Mormon Church when he was governor of Massachusetts. In fact, he governed against his own faith a lot of the time on abortion and on the homosexual agenda. So he clearly doesn't have any particular public allegiance to the tenets of his church when it comes to public policy. I'm not saying he doesn't in his private life, but when it comes to his public policy, he's clearly shown a freedom to depart from the teaching of his own church on matters of public policy. So he's not constrained there, and he's not going to proselytize, I don't believe, because he needs evangelical votes. I mean, that's the largest demographic block he has, are the 74% of evangelicals who have indicated they're going to vote for him. He cannot afford to alienate them by using the White House as a bully pulpit for Mormonism or to proselytize on behalf of the LDS Church. So I think he's going to be very silent about Mormonism, about the distinctives of Mormonism, about the things that distinguish Mormon faith from Christianity. And secondly, you know, Governor Romney, I believe, is going to talk about God. He has been on the campaign trail talking about our rights coming from God. And I believe that Governor Romney may sincerely believe that he's talking about the same God who is revealed in the Scripture, in which case, I think there are some profound differences in understanding between Mormons and the Judeo-Christian tradition on the nature of God. Very profound, so profound I think we're talking about two different religions altogether. But a lot of Americans aren't going to know that. A lot of Americans aren't theologically sophisticated enough to understand that. So they'll believe that Mitt Romney is encouraging them to acknowledge the God that they believe in and trust and worship the God that's revealed in the Bible. So in that case, his exhortations to Americans to acknowledge God and the place of God, and God is the source of our unalienable rights, could wind up doing actually a fair amount of good. And then the other point I made, and the number to call if you want to weigh in on this, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840 is the number to call, 888-589-8840. And the third thing that, the third point I made is that while the Mormon Church's view of theology is not orthodox, its view of politics is. This is a striking thing. One of the best pamphlets I've ever read on the subject of the proper role of government was written by Ezra Taft Benson, who before his death was a card-carrying member in good standing of the Church of Joseph Smith. And this is the best pamphlet, frankly, I have ever read on the subject of the proper role of government, and it was written by a Mormon. I want to give you just two quotes from this book, The Proper Role of Government. Here's what Benson says in The Proper Role of Government. Government's role is restricted, quote, to protection against loss of life, loss of property, and loss of liberty, and basically, period. He doesn't say period. I'm adding that. But he says, look, this is the role of government. This is what you hear every day on Focal Point. This is the proper role of government according to the Scripture. I mean, I don't even know if Ezra Taft Benson was familiar with Romans 13, how much he knew of it, how familiar he was with the Bible's teaching on the role of government. But this is right out of the Scripture, that the role of government is limited to protection against loss of life, loss of property, and loss of liberty. That's the role of government, and that's it. In other words, to sum it up, its role is justice, pure and simple. That's what the Founding Fathers believed. The role of government can be summed up in one word, and that is justice. You praise the people that do right, and you punish those who do wrong. So if somebody does damage, somebody takes somebody else's life, they infringe on their right to life, it's government's job to punish that. If they infringe on their right to liberty, it's government's job to punish that. If somebody kidnaps you and tries to hold you for ransom, they've violated your freedom of liberty, it's government's job to punish that. And if somebody infringes on a fellow citizen's right to property, it's government's job to punish that. They steal something that belongs to somebody else, government has a role to step in and to punish that person so we don't take justice into our own hands. We don't want vigilante justice. That's chaos, it's anarchy, and God has established government for that precise purpose, to keep culture from degenerating into chaos when the right to life, liberty, or property is infringed. And Ezra Taft Benson, a Mormon, understood that, and he wrote this, powerful. Government's role is restricted, quote, to protection against loss of life, loss of property, and loss of liberty. And then he goes on to say this is also powerful. Government, quote, cannot claim the power to redistribute the wealth or force reluctant citizens to perform acts of charity against their will. So here's a strong statement. He wrote this decades ago. It is not a proper role of government to redistribute the wealth. The only way that government can do that is by committing theft. The only way the government can do that is by violating the 8th commandment, which says, thou shalt not steal. Doesn't make it right when government does it. So if government says, I've got these people over here, and as a government, I want to give something to these people. They don't have, I don't think they've got enough, and I want to give them something, and so I'm going to go take it from people that have, and I'm going to give it to people who don't. Now, if you do that as a private citizen, that's theft. You go to prison for that. You go to somebody's house, you stick them up, give me your money because I think my neighbor doesn't have enough. You will go to prison for that. It doesn't make it right when government does it under the color of law. Ezra Taft Benson, a card-carrying Mormon, understood that. He wrote it down in the proper role of government. He says it's nothing more than legalized plunder. And that's exactly the view between a conservative view of politics and a governmental view of politics. In a conservative view, the role of government is limited to justice. Other than that, it's the role of government's job is to get out of the way, as Governor Rick Perry said, to be as irrelevant in the lives of its citizens as possible. In a liberal view, government is everything. Government is your nanny. Government is your daddy. Government is your father. Government is your protector. Government is your husband. Government is your provider. Government is your safety net. In other words, government is God under a liberal point of view. Its role is not limited to justice. Its role, in fact, is to redistribute the wealth. And this is Barack Obama's governing philosophy. Remember, he said to Joe the plumber, I believe everybody does better when we spread the wealth around. And by we, he meant government. So if government's going to spread the wealth around, you got to take it from the people that have it, and you got to distribute it to the people who don't. Now, I've said this before. We believe as Christians in the redistribution of wealth. We believe in that passionately. We believe in that in the very core of our being, but we believe in the voluntary redistribution of wealth. What liberals believe in is the involuntary redistribution of wealth. The involuntary redistribution of wealth, which is what liberals believe in, is theft. It is plunder. It is legalized plunder. Conservatives believe in the voluntary redistribution of wealth. That is generosity, that is compassion, that is voluntary in meeting the needs of the less fortunate. So the bottom line that I say in my column here is that, if President Romney will listen to the voice, the political advice of his fellow Mormon, Ezra Taft Benson, if he will listen to that advice of his fellow Mormon, he'd be the next Ronald Reagan. And he would go down in American history as one of our greatest presidents. So here I am, hoping that he'll pay more attention to the writings of his fellow Mormon. That if he will listen to his fellow Mormon, he'll be one of the greatest presidents in American history. That's me saying that as an evangelical. And then the last thing I say, the bottom line for Mitt Romney is the less Mormon he is theologically and the more Mormon he is politically, the better he is going to be as our next president. So I'd like to get your reactions to that. 888-589-8840. Number to call, 888-589-8840. Let's grab a couple of sound bites before the break. Let's go to James in Lafayette, Louisiana. James, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What do you think?
Well, I appreciate you taking my call.
Yes, sir.
But my wife and I were discussing this last night. We don't like to see the polls project Romney ahead of Obama right now for the very simple reason that the Obama people will get upset and start deciding, oh, we've got to get out and vote. And the Romney people will turn around and say, oh, well, he's got it. I don't got to vote.
So you're concerned that they might
bad effect.
Yeah, so you're concerned they might get a little complacent. It might affect turnout, and it might energize the Obama supporters.
Affirmative.
Yeah. Well, you know, and the reality is, you know, you look at him being up 2 points, James, that's margin of error. That's right. Within the margin of error. Margin of error in those polls is typically 3 to 4 points. So, you know, in reality, it's virtually a dead heat. So there isn't anybody on either side of the fence that can afford to go to sleep here. Turnout is still going to be absolutely critical. And Romney does have about a 13-point advantage in the enthusiasm gap, and that certainly works in his favor. So it'll be interesting to see, but certainly, James, I think the reality is there is nobody that can afford not to vote on November 6th. We have got to vote, and we've got to vote our values. All right, James, thank you very much for that. And my good friend Jim Garlow, who's pastor of a mega church in California, I mean, he's taken the IRS straight on. He's looking them right in the eyeball. He endorsed Mitt Romney Sunday morning from his pulpit in his church, Skyline Wesleyan in San Diego. So he's just daring the IRS. Come after me. I am publicly endorsing in front of my mega church a particular candidate for the office of the presidency. Lyndon Baines Johnson says you can't do that and keep your 501c3 status. Jim Garlow saying, come after me. I dare you. ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, standing ready to defend him should his constitutional rights to freedom of speech and the free exercise of religion come under attack. Remember, the Constitution, First Amendment, says Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. There is no more drastic a way you can interfere with the free exercise of religion than for some agency of the government to dictate to a preacher the content of his sermons. If anything violates the First Amendment, that would certainly qualify. Back with more of your calls, 888-589-8840, Focal Point, AFR Talk. Back in 2. Stay with us.